And today we're going to talk about how to apply to the TALL Texans Leadership Institute. We've done this webinar for the last few years, and we find it incredibly useful in helping people fill out the applications, and we just get a much better pool of applicants as a result of these. With me today are Beth Avery, who is the Coordinator of Collection Development at UNT, but she's here as chair of the Leadership Development Committee that oversees the TALL Texans Institute. And we also have... Oh, I did not know. Well, congratulations.
Actually, Ted,
Oh,
I'm
wow.
retired now.
See, we learn lots of things in these webinars. And we also have Walter Betts, who is the systems librarian at TCU, and he is TLA's ALA counselor. And I also add TALL Texans class of 2004. Good morning, Walter. Now, as we get started, one of the key things I want to mention is that TALL Texans will be on a different set of dates, and I hope everybody's heard that. We're not able to get into the middle of June at Montserrat. We looked around for a place all over the state of Texas, but eventually decided the best course was to come back to Montserrat in the middle of July. So our TALL Texans for 2015 will be July 19th through 22nd. The 19th through 22nd of July. And that's at the Montserrat Retreat Center at 600 North Shady Shores Drive in Lake Dallas. And that is, in fact, Montserrat that you see in this first photo. Now, just a few tips before we start. Please feel free to use the chat box to type questions or comments at any time. There's not very many of us today. We are recording the webinar for people who couldn't make it, but we will do our best to respond to questions as we go through. The webinar is being recorded, and we're going to send a link to the recording to everybody who registered. And we will also do an encore presentation of this webinar on December 4th at 2 p.m. Central Time. So we just want to be sure that the information goes out to as many people as possible. To begin, we want to talk about why apply to TALL Texans. Some of you may have started the application, some of you may be just curious about the Institute, but TALL Texans is committed to developing new leaders for the profession, for libraries, and the communities they serve. There are many things that you get out of TALL Texans. First and foremost, of course, is leadership training, and in TALL Texans we do distinguish between leadership and management. One of the things we say is that managers solve problems, leaders prevent problems. And that's all about vision, having a vision for your library, your community, and yourself. You might say that managers get the trains to run on time, but leaders will get those trains to run faster and less expensive and hold more people. So we talk a lot about vision and implementing vision. Walter and Beth, be sure to jump in at any point if you want to add anything. We also talk about self-discovery, and TALL Texans has been called a transformational experience. It helps you in your interactions with other people, in the leadership roles, in supervision, but in many other ways, by looking at yourself and your situation in new ways. And one of the things we find that it does is it helps you see things about yourself that you may not have realized, including barriers that you might have put up for yourself in your career and your interactions, and how to get past those barriers. And of course, it's also about networking. This is a great way to make connections with librarians from other parts of the state, in other types of libraries, with other kinds of backgrounds, and at many different levels. So you will meet people from all over doing many different things, and yet you'll find that you have many things in common with these people. And many people build lifetime friendships based on people they meet at the TALL Texans Institute. Walter, you went through TALL Texans as well. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Absolutely. You will, if you talk to a TALL Texan, they will tell you that it was a life-changing experience. And you know, that sounds a little bit like an exaggeration, a little hyperbole, but it truly isn't. Um, Most of them will tell you that it was the most important experience of their professional life. Um, it's a educational opportunity that will make your head hurt. Um, and you will walk away after the experience, you know, needing a couple of days to digest everything that has gone on. But it will truly change your outlook on what it means to be a librarian, what it means to be a library leader, and
Now, there are some
the
basic requirements for coming
role of
into
the
TALL
librarian
Texans.
is
The
in today's
first is
society.
5 years of work
That's
experience in any kind of library. The time does not need to be continuous, so you can have a few years there, a few years here, and no library degree is required. And that's out of respect for the many, many librarians, even library directors in Texas who do not have the degree. They're library practitioners. Nonetheless, they are called upon to fulfill the duties sometimes of a library director in their small community. We also ask if it, for what we call lay persons, and that I'm not fond of the term lay person. We are not priests, but this is people who are not serving as librarians, but they have other roles, and frequently these are community advocates. They serve on library boards or they are library champions in other ways, and we ask that they will have worked with libraries for 3 years, but of course they also need to show a lot of leadership experiences, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the application itself. We do ask that people be currently employed in a position that is in a library or closely related to libraries, but it can be full or part-time. And we also ask that people be members of the Texas Library Association at the time of review. And the time of review is mid-February. So we set February 1st as the date for having your membership set up with TLA. And we'll mention that again a little bit later. There are some other requirements. We do ask that you complete the online application by January 30th. That's a Friday. That's the last Friday in January. And also we ask for 3 references. And we'll talk a little bit more about references later, but I mention them now because we do traditionally tend to be a little bit more relaxed about that deadline with the references. We hope that you'll be able to get them in by January 30th, but people that are approached to be references tend to be very high-level, busy people. I'm not saying these are the kinds of people you need to use, but we do often see deans of universities, city managers, corporate executives, people that may not be familiar with TALL Texans, so we can give a little bit extra time for those deadlines to get in. I see someone had raised their hand. Elaine, I think you had raised your hand. If you can type your question, we can answer that. Oh, sorry, no worries. You were just stretching. Okay, that's fine. So that's about the deadline. And of course, as we get into it, we'll talk more about the other qualitative requirements we like to see. We are looking for up-and-coming leaders, people that have a sense of initiative, people that have a vision, and your ability to turn training into action is very important. And we'll see more of that as we get into the questions. So starting the application, and you can get to this from either the members only page in TLA or the TALL Texans page itself. It'll have a link to this place where you start the application, and it doesn't take you right into the application. It gives you some initial instructions to kind of preview the questions, reminds you that you have the option to submit media files, reminds you of the option to save. We'll talk all about this as we go through. But the main thing I want to emphasize here is not just how to get there, but this is not an overnight process. Do not start the application on January 29th. There are many introspective questions that ask you a lot about your career, a lot about your leadership background. It takes some very careful thought. And if you rush, the results will not be great. Walter and Beth, you've had a chance to be part of the overseeing the application process. Do you have any initial comments as we get into this?
Yes, again, we're going to be talking a lot about these questions here in just a few minutes and what the selection committee looks for in your response. This is very similar to a grant application or a job application. The questions that you complete, really you need to write it, let it sit for a couple of days, give yourself a chance to reflect on your answers, rewrite it, and then have someone review it for you. And we're going to talk about the importance of having a reviewer, a second reader, if you would, at the end of the seminar here, the webinar. But it really is, like Ted said, you just cannot do this in one sitting.
The thing I would add is that you really do need to pay attention to the details, and we're going to be telling you that a lot. So don't, just keep it in mind. Attention to detail is something that you're going to have as a quality later on through your career. The other thing I would encourage people is when you finish your application, let it sit. Don't think you're going to do this and turn it in the next, 5 minutes later. Let it sit and then read it out loud.
And as Walter indicated, we'll also encourage you to have another person also go over it, because they will see things that you may have missed when you write it. One of the first things I want to cover about the application is, again, you do not have to do this in one sitting. You can save it and come back to it and edit it. And we want you to do that. We want you to spend some time on that. When you get to the end of the application, you'll see a button that says Save TALL Texans Application. When you click this, that saves your work, and you can edit it as many times as you want up until the deadline. There is no ultimate button that says Submit. That's the same button. So you can go back in and save, you can go back in and save, and then when the deadline comes at midnight on January 30th, this button, you will no longer be able to go back in and edit your application. And that will be the final form, but you can go in as many times as you want until then. When you save, you'll see this confirmation screen that tells you that you've submitted the application. It gives you a link to get back to it, and it'll give you a password. This password that you see here is just an example. You'll have a completely individual, unique password for your application. But that's how you go back in. You use this link and that password to go back and edit. And you can get back to those through the link, or you can go back in through either of the TALL Texans application links to get to that place. So then when you do that, then you'll see this screen where you, and this is also when you first start the application, you'll see Start a New Application or Modify, and you put in the password right there in that box, and that will take you to it. I know it seems like I'm beating this to death, but we really want to emphasize, no, the password will not be randomized each time. A question from Jan. You'll have the same password, so once you get it, you can write it down and you'll be able to go in quickly each and every time. The application starts with a commitment section, and this just reminds you what you're getting into. And there's a couple of things listed here. One of the things is that we're trying to form a learning community. So we do ask that you spend all the time with us. You be prepared to stay for the entire 4 days of the Institute. We have dorm rooms. We're going to ask you to actually sleep overnight there, eat the meals with us, be part of the learning community. There is a tuition and housing fee that comes with this. We'll talk about more later and why this is not scary. You can see the number there is $615, which I know sounds like a lot, but there's tremendous numbers of financial aid available for that. We've never had anyone ever back out for inability to pay. It has never been an issue. So don't worry about the price. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, of course, we also ask that you let us mention your name and announce you with our press releases for Tall Texans, and just let everybody know that you've received this honor. And so then we get into question 1. And this is the easiest question because this is just personal data about yourself. This is just name and contact information. The contact information is important because we may have additional questions. If you're selected, of course, I'll need to get in touch with you fairly often leading up to the Institute as we prepare. So again, as Beth mentioned, this is just a little attention to detail, just making sure you've covered all the things. There are certain things that are required in order to save the application when you go in the first time: your name, address, phone number, and your TLA district. Those are the things that constitute a beginning application. If you don't fill out one of those things when you start, you'll get a little error message that said we still need those. But that's just the very basic beginning of the application form. Walter or Beth, did you have anything you wanted to add on question 1? This is pretty straightforward. In question 2, we ask about your education. And what we're really interested in is post-secondary education and specialized training experiences. Any particular CE that you may have had that you really found profound or gave you a new view, gave you special new skills that you've used. Of course, and if you have a library degree, this is where you got that, or if you have other degrees. If you do not have a library degree or any master's degree, we do ask that you please go ahead and list college degree here. But none of those are required to get into the Institute. This is just to give us a bigger picture of who you are and where you came from. Quick question from Jane. Would things like TLA pre-conferences count as training even if you didn't claim CE credits? Yes. Yes, those training experiences, any kind of training would work. And then we get into question 3, which is employment history, starting with your current job position and then going back. And you can actually add more space if you want more lines by clicking that More Employment link. And this is a good time to note that on the right side of the page, you see something called weighted value. Each question on the application form carries points. These points are very important. They add up to your final score and have a direct impact on the selection. As you look at those points, the key value for you is how much work to put in to those different parts. Attention to detail is important. We hope you'll fill out even these lower point questions completely. But this is a 5-point question. Later on, we're going to see 10 and 15 and 20-point questions. And if you see a 20-point question, then you know that is the most important question on the entire form, and that's where you really want to concentrate and put your best foot forward.
One thing that we look at this, obviously the committee is looking to see that you are employed in a library setting and that you meet that minimum requirement. But it's always good to see progression in a job, especially for public and academic librarians where they've accepted greater responsibility. But that shouldn't scare the school folks, because we know a lot of school librarians can stay at a single campus and have an incredible career, but there's not the same level of opportunity necessarily for promotion. So don't let that scare you, but it's really a good place for you to explain what your experiences are and what you're doing.
And as we go further along, you'll see that you'll have the opportunity to explain how you've grown in your job, even if you've had the same job for 5 years. So, don't B, as Walter and Ted said, don't be scared of this or put off saying, oh, well, I haven't, become the next step up, or I haven't shown a lot of growth, because everyone
Our next
grows in their
question talks
career,
about
and you will have the
professional
opportunity
organizations.
to show
And
us how
these
you've
are
done that.
committees, groups, associations that you've been involved with as a part of your library career in the last 5 years. We do ask that you spell out acronyms, for example. So for ALA, most of us are going to know what ALA is, but you may have some other group that you've been a part of that we are not familiar with. So we'll ask that you spell those out. We do ask if, under description of involvement, you tell us about offices you may have had. Being part of a committee is considered an office, even if you're not the chair. So we ask if you're on particular committees, if you're involved in any kind of project, and naturally if you received any kind of awards. But none of that is required. It's not required that you've received any awards to be considered for TALL Texans. We're looking for patterns more than particular honors or particular citations.
Again, to add, membership is very important. It shows your involvement, but we are also looking for folks who have been more than just a member. Volunteer experience, committee experience, officer experience. That's really important. One thing to remember about TALL Texans, it's not an institute that creates leaders. It's an institute that enhances your leadership ability. So that is the starting point, that you've already shown some leadership ability.
In question 5, we ask about a different kind of organization. These are what we call community organizations, and these are groups outside your library career. So they're from your community, they're service organizations, faith-based organizations, business organizations, anything outside the direct library career. Now, here we need to say a particular word about how we define community. For a public librarian, the community is very obvious, the civic community. But in the case of academic or school, your campus is also your community. So if you're involved in the faculty senate, if you're involved in a PTA committee, those kinds of things are considered community organizations if you're not there as the librarian, but as a member of the school or college. Walter and Beth, did you have anything to add with that?
And again, we're looking for patterns of involvement, what you did, and your explanation of what kind of activities you were involved with, because this is going to be very important in the questions to come.
One of the other things that people are beginning to see is people are involved in online communities, which are communities that you really want to think about when you're filling this out. Maybe you're the organizer of an online community of hobbyists or something, so think about, go broad. Think about all the things you do. People think, I'm
Beth
not
brings
involved,
up a
all I
really
have
good
is my
point.
job.
Even if
But
it's a
you're not.
recreational
You're
activity,
involved in lots
if you're
of
still
things.
involved in that,
Think
especially
broadly.
if you're in
Fill
a
out
leadership or project, we definitely want to hear about that. Sonia has a question. Would community organizations include such organizations as Delta Kappa Gamma, an educator group? Absolutely, yes.
And another thing, this, modesty is considered a good trait, but it isn't in this application. Don't be modest. We don't want you to boast or brag necessarily, but tell us factually.
Now the questions we've answered so far, questions 1 through 5, this is really objective things. This is what you've done personally in your home life and your contact information. This is just matters of fact. Now in questions 6 through 12, we're going to ask about your leadership history. We're moving on to more personal subjective questions. This is where the point values are going to come more into play. And we are going to ask you to pay attention to the word limit on each question. That can sometimes be a little tricky. And what we often do, we do encourage people not to use the actual form, but you might draft your answer in Microsoft Word or some other word processor. Something can give you a word count, let you refine it a little bit, and then copy and paste into the document. And then another major point we want to make is to answer the question. And this comes into what Beth was saying earlier about detail. When you respond, yes, we want you to highlight and showcase your experiences and your abilities and your skills. That's true, but we also want you to directly respond to the question that's being asked on the form. We're amazed at how many applications we get that become lists of achievements, but are not really addressing the meaning by answering the question. So the first question here is question 6. Describe how your leadership skills were enhanced by your active participation in the organizations that you listed in questions 4 and 5. These are your professional and your community organizations. Now, note that we've gone from a 5-point question to a 10-point question. This is a little bit more. We have a 150-word limit on this question. But this is where we want you to draw out the meaning of your participation in those groups that you mentioned in questions 4 and 5.
And so, coming from an educator standpoint, a library school educator, you first have to be able to identify what a leadership skill is. And so, not as a definitive list, but you have up there in your resources, the web links in the upper left-hand corner, the Instigator blog's leadership skills list. That's a starting point, and it's definitely not a definitive list. But come across and say, okay, these are skills I have. Tie them back to questions 4 and 5. It really is frustrating to the committee when you turn around and say, "Oh, this is my leadership skill, and here, here's where I've, how I've demonstrated this leadership skill," but we can't really see where it happened.
In question 7, we ask you to describe what you've learned or how you applied what you learned to a real-life leadership situation. We're referring to workshops, seminars, and continuing education sessions, and you'll recall that a few questions ago we asked about training events that you've been to. This is where that comes into play. So here's where we ask you to show us how you translate training and theory into real-life application.
You're going to get the feeling that the selection committee, must be a group of sadists or something, because what we're saying sounds very stringent. But when you're reviewing 50 plus applications, you get certain pet peeves that drive you nuts. And you're going to hear us harp on this over and over and over again. If you notice the question, it says, after attending one workshop, seminar, or continuing education session. One is good. One needs to be tied back. One is very specific. Giving me 2 only irritates me. And you say, "Oh, come on, well, it really isn't that bad." But when you're reading 40, 50 of these, 60 of these, and someone consistently ignores the question, even in this small manner, it can drive you nuts. The other quite important reason why we want you to focus on one is that you only have a limited word count. You've got 150 words, so you can adequately flesh out what happened in one seminar. But when you list what happened,
exactly, we're looking for depth, and that's why we limit it to one learning experience and how you derive from that.
And piggybacking on that a little, this is a time we really do want you to be specific. We don't want to see the I learned the importance of being a leader because nobody did what I told them to do. No, we want real detail and real depth and what you internalized
And Beth
from
brings up a really
the
good point.
situation and
You may know people who are on the selection
handled
committee, or they
that
may know
situation.
you, but in this process, we go by what's on the form. So even if we're personally acquainted with you, the committee is going to go by what you have put as your answer to these questions. That's why it's so important to be in depth and be specific. Unfortunately, we've had cases where we've had some superstars of TLA come through the selection process, but they didn't fill out the form in great detail. They really didn't share themselves on the form, and that's what we go by. Question from Jan. So are you saying quality is better than quantity? I think that's a fair statement. We want you to flesh out answers. We want you to be complete, but quality is the key. Yes, that's given in each case.
Yes, and Jan also has a question about the word count. I believe it's 150.
And looking on to question 8, keeping an eye on to see if any other questions are coming through. Question 8, what do you consider your most distinctive career achievement and why? Oh, well, there was a quick question. Would someone be downgraded if there were 100 words submitted? I'd say it depends on the words. You wouldn't necessarily be downgraded if the answer is incomplete. Then yes, but it's possible to have a complete answer in 100 words versus 150.
Exactly. We're looking again for the quality of the answer. Now, if you give us one sentence on a 20-point answer, you're not going to have a good one-sentence answer. But we're not counting the words.
The software takes care of that.
Too many applications for us to actually count the words. I guess the program will knock out anything that's too long. But on this question, what do you consider your most distinctive career achievement? This is not a time to be modest. This is time to be very specific. And we are actually talking about career achievements. We've had a lot of answers like, oh, I'm most proud of my children. And I understand that my son's a sophomore in college, and I'm very proud of the things that he's done. But that's not my career achievement. And if you give us an answer that we go, that appears to be weak, we're going to be talking about this in the committee going, this is really the best thing that they've done in their career. So find something that you're very proud of, that makes a lot of sense, and really describe what it is. Also, again, it's singular. Your career achievement, not a career achievements. Give us only one. Don't drive us nuts with 2 or 3.
And this is again a thing where the why is important. So to say, my most distinctive achievement was being selected as library director. That's not it. Why was that important? How did you, the next sentence, how did you accomplish this? But we're looking for the whys, not just the one sentences.
General practice with the committee is the why and the how are a lot more important than the what. Because it's
although just to reemphasize
as long as you can
what we've
we're talking over each other, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Walter.
What I was trying to say is it's your explanation of why and how it's important more so than obviously it has to be a distinctive career achievement. I mean, you can't say winner of the annual coffee poll or something like that, but you have to justify it with the what and the how, the why and the how.
Exactly. Question 9, what do you consider your greatest leadership skill and why? And again, Walter has that list, Instigator Blogs leadership skills list up at the web links. That's not a definitive list, but if you're trying to figure out what are leadership skills, that's a good place to start as you hear what might be your greatest leadership skill.
Again, it's singular. We only want one. You're going to hear this multiple times. And it's really good to tie these questions together. And so if this one relates back to question 6, which is the describe how your leadership skills were enhanced by active participation, that really helps us understand that your participation in in organizations, what the things that you've gone through has improved. You've learned from what your experiences are. And I can speak English. Sorry about this. The other thing is we are talking about leadership skills. We are not talking about management skills. So be very careful. If your greatest leadership skill is that you can schedule everybody to work without any conflicts, we're going to say that's really nice. And why? The why is the important thing. Why is that your greatest leadership skill? You might be able to justify that as a great leadership skill with a great why answer, but make sure that we really are looking at leadership skills.
In question 10, and this is the biggie, this is the 20-point question, why do you want to participate in the TALL Texans Leadership Development Institute? Why are you here? I can't how important this question is. This is the 20-point question. This is the one that the committee studies more than any other question on the form. And we encourage you to give a complete answer. We encourage you to review your answer often and put some real thought into this, have other people look at it. Walter, do you have any tips you'd like to give?
Yes. This is not the place to look inward and to be self-serving. That drives the committee nuts. This is not a place to turn around and say something along the lines of, well, my participation will help me land a better job. My participation will make me look good in the eyes of my supervisor. I want to participate because my supervisor tells me this is what I need to do. Those are the kinds of questions that will drive the committee nuts and will cause them your application. Also, the other cardinal sin on this question is the one sentence answer. You really have to turn around and tell us what it is that you're going to get out of TALL Texans and how you're going to put it to use. It's, talking about outward focus.
This again is like the question on the interview where people say, and where do you see yourself in 5 years? We don't want the answer of being library director. What we want to know is what you as a professional person are going to become through participation in TALL Texans.
In question 11, we talk about, as Beth was kind of foreshadowing there, what are your professional leadership goals in the next 5 years? And how would these goals improve libraries in your community? Note that there's to this. First, we're interested in your professional leadership goals, and then we're interested in the why. We want to know how these goals will improve your library or libraries in your immediate community. Again, community may have a little bit different definition depending on what kind of library you come from. This could include campus community.
Again, to dissect this question, make sure you understand what a goal is. There are a lot of definitions of goals, but usually, we're looking at something that's measurable, attainable, all that kind of fun stuff. You've heard the rhetoric over the years. Give us something that we know that is achievable. Note that it's goals within the next 5 years. We're not talking about 30 years down the road. These are short-term attainable goals. These are professional goals, not personal goals. So make sure that you're, you might say something along the lines of, I would like to get a PhD. Well, that sounds personal, but if you turn around and qualify it again with your explanation of how you would then turn around and use that additional knowledge, that experience, the education that you've received to improve libraries, that's a fantastic answer. But if you turn around and say, I want to get a PhD because I want to wear the cute, neat little hat with the tassel, then we're going to go, no. If you say that your goal in the next 5 years is to get out of debt, well, that's very commendable, but we don't care. It needs to be something that you're talking about in a professional or leadership type of goal that will improve libraries. So we definitely want something there. And to be honest with you, the thing that the phrase that we use in the selection committee when we're looking at this is, does the candidate understand the big picture of librarianship in their community?
On question 12, which we talk about, in addition to participating in the TALL Texans Leadership Development, describe one learning experience you would pursue and how you would pursue it. So as you move towards those goals, whether or not you get into TALL Texans, give us one learning experience that you'll reach for to help you reach your goals.
So you can almost guess what Walter's going to say. He's going to say one experience and only one experience. That experience needs to be tied to question 11. We need to have that tied to the goals. And it needs to be very specific. Don't give us something general. For example, if you turn around and say, I want to learn JavaScript, I'm going to say, exactly how is that going to help you? But if you turn around and say, I want to learn JavaScript so I can expand the web presence of my library and flesh it out there, then that's a goal that really relates back to, especially if you had a goal of number 11 is expanding the web presence for your library and your community. Then it's all tied together. It's something that we can look at and clearly score. It really gets frustrating when people turn around and list something, list a particular learning experience. For example, they might, if they're a school librarian, they might say, one day I would like to go to the ASL conference. Again, that's a really good conference. It's a really good thing. It's outside of the TLA sphere, but why? What do you want to do with it? Why is that important, and how does that relate to the goal that you listed in question 11?
Question 13 asks about your 3 references. Now in this case, and as the instructions point out here, we have a couple rules about the references. One of them must be from an individual who has been in a supervisory or management relationship to you. So a boss, a former boss's boss, something like that. One reference must be from a librarian. That might be the same person as the supervisor. No reference should be from a person you currently supervise. When you fill out these references, each on your form, and then when you submit your application, each reference will be given a URL, and you'll see that on the confirmation form, as you see here. We count on you to send that URL to the individual, explaining that you would like them to write a reference. They can go to this form, and then there's basically 2 questions. We do ask generally how long they've known you and some simple things like that, but we ask them to talk about your leadership capability and why they think you would be a good person to select for TALL Texans. they share that nomination, that reference with you or not, that's between you two.
I would encourage you, as you ask the different folks to serve as references, that you share the information that you're putting in your application so that they can reinforce particular issues. We always think it's fantastic when a reference mentions something that was listed in your application. It's supporting information. It's always bad when the references wax eloquently about some fantastic thing that you've done that you don't tell us about, because we're, we're stuck going, wait a minute, why didn't the applicant give us this information? So, let them know what you're talking about, and they might turn around and give you information, give you ideas of something that's really important for you to put on your application.
That's a really good point, and unfortunately, that does happen with some frequency. That we see an application and we go through it, and then the reference will mention some spectacular thing, some great quality, some service, some award, and that's the first we hear of it in the reference part. And those kinds of things need to be represented in the whole form. Beth, did you have anything you wanted to add about references?
No, I think you've covered it.
We want to point out that, like you, the reference they will get a submission screen, a confirmation screen with a password, so that they can also edit their work over several settings. And just to reiterate, one person has to have been in a managerial relationship with you. One person needs to be a librarian, but it can be the same person. No subordinates, and just remember that these are professional references, like you might an application for a job.
One thing, though, for example, if you served as a Girl Scout leader and there was someone who could discuss the leadership role that you took in that particular organization, that's not necessarily professional, but that's the perfect kind of reference. Someone who can speak to your leadership qualities. It doesn't. When we say professional, we're not limiting it to the library world or your employment.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, quite right, Walter. Question 14 doesn't carry a point value. This is notification, and this is the person whom you would like us to tell when when it's decided whether you have been accepted to TALL Texans. And there's several reasons that we do this. Obviously, we want you to be recognized at your institution for being accepted to TALL Texans. Also, we find that this is a great opportunity for us to explain to principals, superintendents, deans, city managers, whoever you might put for your notification, the importance of TALL Texans and what it's all about. And this often involves funding and meeting that registration fee. You can, of course, put yourself, if you would just like yourself to find out and you'll handle letting anybody know on your end, that's perfectly okay. If that's your choice, then you would just put your own name here. Question 15 is just administrative information. We're asking if you're applying as a librarian or as a layperson. We're asking how you heard about the Institute. That tells us about our marketing techniques. And we ask if you have any special needs. And we have some basic demographic information we ask about, and whether you think you'll be able to get financial assistance from your employer or whether you might need financial assistance. And this lets us give a heads up to powers that be in different places that we might need additional assistance for particular people. And then lastly is a little bit of demographic information about race and ethnic background. One of the charges of TALL Texans is to develop diverse leaders, and to know whether we're meeting that charge, we ask people if they could share this information, but it's completely optional.
Going back to the employer question for just a second, it's really no. It's important to be able to ask your employer for financial assistance. And one of the reasons that you should not be shy about asking for financial assistance is they cannot provide this type of training for you anywhere near the cost. This is national level training. The facilitators, and I know that Ted will talk about Maureen and Jack in a little bit, are nationally known. The training that you get is, like I say, the Institute has been the model for practically every library leadership institute. If there's one thing that TLA can be proud of, it is the quality and the actual creation of this leadership institute. So don't be shy about asking for this support. Then going on to the diversity question, yes, we're asking for ethnic diversity here, racial diversity, but when we are talking about diversity overall as we create the class, you need to realize that we do want to have a class that is racially, ethnically diverse. We want a class that contains a diverse number of professional types. If we have nothing but public librarians in the class, it will fail. Not because there's anything wrong with being a public librarian, but you don't have the perspective of the school, the public, the special librarian. We are looking for geographic diversity, not just all over the state, but also rural versus urban. We're looking for gender diversity. And one of the hardest things that the selection committee does is work to create a balanced class, one that will function well together and learn from each other.
Now on these last questions, the questions 6 through 12, starting in 2013, applicants have the option to give answers as media recordings. And on the form, you would say in the answer, submitting answers by media file, and then email those answers to me, or depending on size, we might use Dropbox or some other method. But we ask that you send them to us in MP3 or MP4 format and try to stay within the word limit. Walter, do you have more to add on that?
I thought we had changed that to audio only this year.
I have wondered about that too, but I looked back at the minutes and we didn't have a conclusive decision. There wasn't a vote recorded in the minutes.
In the minutes, okay, because I thought we had. We'll get back to you on that, but I believe that we're only doing, from what the executive board had discussed, that we would be accepting sound recordings only. And let me explain to the group so that there is no confusion here. We know that some people have a hard time expressing themselves in writing, and the idea was that if we were to provide alternative option, someone could express themselves possibly more persuasively. The challenge we had is that we had last year 3 incredible presentations that included things other than just the text of the answer. And they were incredible. They were very persuasive, almost unfairly so. And so what we ended up by doing for the selection committee, I was the chair of the selection committee, Ted and I viewed those. I stripped out the video and presented only the audio so that they would have an equal footing with the other applicants. Now I will tell you, because obviously there's a lot more work into creating a media version, their answers were a little bit more polished. Actually, they were a lot more polished, and so all 3 of the folks who submitted media applications were accepted. But again, I will verify that very quickly, but I was pretty sure that we had set up MP3 only sound. That way we do have that level playing field. So we will get that information back to you.
Let's talk a moment about what we see as the most common errors as we have been through several of these selection committees, and we've seen hundreds of applications at this point. Mistakes in spelling or grammar tend to be not favorably viewed. In this age of spell check, selection committees tend to deal harshly with glaring errors in spelling and grammar, so I would be very careful about that. Again, failure to answer the question as it's written, failure to answer completely, As we've emphasized already, these are things that tend to drive the committee a little crazy, but there's a reason for the question and why it's phrased the way it is. There are certain things we're looking for that I hope we've tried to make clear, and to give you a chance at depth and to expose certain aspects of your leadership background. That's what we're really looking at. And if the question is not complete, if it doesn't do that, then it's going to have a lower point value. Walter has talked about the flow, how the questions can fit together. When you talk about you're in certain groups and you have leadership skills that you picked up from those groups, and then those leadership skills were applied in particular ways, you can see how the different questions can actually link together based on your experience, and that's one of the things we're looking for. And again, as Walter said, we're looking for the big picture. We want to see that your vision for the profession and for libraries extends beyond your own immediate physical library. And again, in terms of things that drive selection committees crazy, Walter had touched on this earlier. When you talk about your main reason for attending, why you want to attend, we're looking for an attitude of service. If you tell us that your main reason for attending is to make your resume look better, to raise your income by getting a promotion, because someone else told you to go, those aren't really the answers we're looking for. Now, all of those things might be true. This will look good on your resume, and it is very common for TALL Texans to get some kind of promotion within a year of attending the Institute. And it might be that someone else came to you and said, this would really be good for you, you should do this. But we want to know why you are involved and how this fits into your goals as a professional. If you tell us that the Institute curriculum is beneath you, we're going to wonder why you're applying in the first place. And that might sound strange, but we have actually seen that on applications. And lastly, if you tell us that you really should be attending as a mentor, well, then clearly TALL Texans is not right for you, and we leave you to whatever higher plane you might wish to ascend to. But there are other reasons why applications might be declined, and Walter's talked about the balance. The balance is so important, and we as an institute have learned this the hard way, that if you have a preponderance of one library type, for example, then without meaning to, all of the examples and illustrations and exercises slowly skew to that one library type, and we lose the balanced perspective, we lose the value of the other library types, we lose the networking advantage. So that's why we try so hard to make sure we have a diverse group by type of library, geographically, by gender, and so on. And this is the reason why really good applications may not get in a particular year, because we have to reach for this balance. So, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but after you apply, the selection committee meets in mid-February to review the applications. They select up to 24 participants and up to 5 alternates. They do not necessarily have to select 24 people. One year we had 20 people. It just depends on how many applications they feel are up to the standard that we're trying to accomplish. Notices are sent out around March 1st, and this is the key part I want to emphasize. Everyone who is declined or is an alternate is told why that happened. I send out these, what I call coaching letters. They explain to you what happened in the process and how your application can be changed to increase the chance of acceptance in a subsequent application. And we really hope that people will come back and apply again. And I'm trying to emphasize that even if you're not accepted, that does not mean that you're not a leader, that you're not worthy. That's not what that means. That just means in the particular pool that we had, looking at the balance of the pool, looking at who all was in there, we might have chosen 24 other people, but that doesn't mean we don't want you for the program. You just didn't get in that year. But we do want you to come back, and we'll explain to you how you can change the application to increase the odds of that. We're very careful about that.
This year, we actually had people who had applied in the past and had not been selected, but had redone their application and were selected this year. So really, don't be discouraged if you're not selected the first time.
That's exactly right. And quite often, a large number of applicants make it on their second time.
And as I'm keeping an eye on the question poll, just a few words about cost. The few words are, don't panic. As we said, the cost is $615. But first of all, the units, the roundtables, divisions, they set up sometimes thousands of dollars to give as scholarships to members who have been selected for TALL Texans. So they might come through. We certainly hope your institution will pay because they will be getting back a better employee at the end. Len, I see you have to move on, but thank you so much for attending, and we will send you the recording. There are also community groups. You have to keep an eye on the deadlines because their calendar is not like our calendar, but groups like Lions, Kiwanis, they have scholarships that they can bring to bear. And then also there's vendors. We've had at least one person who got a full registration fee paid by EBSCO. It's not mentioned in this list, but if you are from a small community, and by small I mean that you serve 12,000 people or less, the Talker Foundation has a process where you can apply to have your registration completely covered by the Talker Foundation if you're from a small community library. And then lastly, our fund of last resort is the June Berry Endowment. This is named for the very first coordinator of TALL Texans, and we use the interest from that endowment to supplement. It can't cover a full registration fee. It's not that big, but it can make up the last little bit of funding for those who need help. So there are many, many sources that are available. And again, we've never, ever had anyone withdraw because of inability to pay. So we've been through the whole process. We've been through the application. We've talked about funding and submissions. Does anybody have any particular questions? Or Walter and Beth, if you have any other particular comments you'd like to add.
We really look forward to getting your applications. Fun to go through these and to see the incredible things that are happening in Texas.
I actually read applications last year from people that I thought I knew, and I learned more about them, which was a great experience for me. But I want to encourage you to start the process early. Having submitted it and then said, oh, I should have. So start early.
And to piggyback on that, another thing that we find from people who are successful, so many of them have found a second reader, a friend to turn around and read through the application. And it's always your friends who can look at it objectively and say, well, you didn't really answer this question, or why didn't you mention XYZ for this question? It's very important to have a fresh set of eyes.
That's so important, Walter. We did have a question about how many applications we usually get in each year. Typically, it's about 50, depending on the economy and other factors. When the economy was first having some difficulties, we got down to about 30 one year. But then there was several years ago, there was a year when there were about 90. But on the average, it's about 50 applications. Walter, I think, did you have another point you wanted to make about funding?
No, it was a question that I had about the Talker Fund. One time I thought there was something available for funding library substitutes for the small community libraries. I don't know if that ever came to fruition.
A leadership development committee has a subcommittee working on that.
Okay.
So as soon as we have something, and let people know.
What
What Walter's referring to is we're very aware that in small community libraries, especially if it's a one-person shop, sometimes it's the time that is a factor. So having a substitute would be the key, and we're trying to work out a way that that can happen.
And the committee is still working on it. They have not been as successful as they had hoped they would be, but they haven't given up yet. So they're still working on it and hope to have something before we meet in February.
Okay, well, thank you all for attending. If you have additional questions after the fact, please feel free to contact any of us. Here's my contact information, and you see the others up at the top of the screen. I want to thank Beth and Walter for joining us today. Lots of great content, and we look forward to seeing all of your applications, we hope, very soon.
Yes, good luck.
Forward to reading them.